Oh, I'm sorry I startled you. So for this video, we're doing a pretty little vibrant landscape with some mountains, trees, and little flowers in the foreground. So for my composition of this little piece, I decided to do it in like thirds, just for like convenience of composition. The first third is gonna be mostly the sky, the clouds, and just the sky part. The second third is going to be where most of our mountains and trees are, and the kind of like, just dots of the flowers and grass. And then in the last third, we can get a little more detailed with the flowers. I did this in my sketchbook. I decided to do a little underlayer of this, and that's just so that I have some pigment to work on top of. So for this painting, I'm gonna need a palette. I'm using this palette paper, a little paper towel, some kind of reference photo. I'm using the sketchbook page. Bean, will you hold this for me for a second? The paint colors I have are ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, permanent magenta, cadmium yellow medium hue, titanium white, and cadmium red. I want to use black also. I'm gonna run and grab that real quick. So I've got a whole bunch of colors I'm using this time. Sometimes I stick with a more limited palette, and sometimes I use a bunch of colors. But really all you need is a black, a blue, a reddish or magenta, a yellow, and a white. There we go. Thanks for holding this for me, Beanie. Well, I also have a cup of water. Let's get to painting our sky. I want to have like a slightly bigger brush. It doesn't have to be huge, but it's going to cover like some solid colors and some big chunks of space. So to make it go faster, I use a slightly bigger brush. So I want to mix up a pretty light purple. We're gonna kind of separate our painting into thirds. First section's gonna be mostly sky. The second section's gonna have some mountains that I'm just gonna sketch in. So now let's get this purple color up in the sky. So as we move down, we're gonna get a little bit lighter. A little bit more and a little bit pinker. So we're kind of making a gradient. The way we're doing this is just subtly changing the paint color as we move down. And I want to go even lighter, more white, and even pinker. So there's my sky. We made this like blending kind of effect by just changing the color slightly. It's not a perfect blend, but we don't really need it to be. We're just focused on the color here, basically. Oh, I'm using an MDF board. It didn't say that. I'm not using a canvas or a piece of paper. This is a little wooden board. Oh, look. 1/4 inch 2x4 MDF board that we cut up with a table saw into little different sections so I can paint on it after we gessoed it. So now we want to make our cloud. And so I want this cloud to still be pink. We were working slightly towards a slightly more pinky purple here. It's still purple, obviously, but we're just adding more and more red magenta. Now I want this cloud to be like pinky orange. So to get that effect, that's why I'm using this cadmium red light hue. We're gonna mix up a orangey, pinky cloud color here. So I don't want to do any like big puffs on this cloud. I tend to like really puffy clouds. I want this cloud to be a little flatter. The focus of this painting is going to be the trees and the mountains, and then the little flowers that come back. And then we're going to make basically the same color, but darker. And what we're going to do here is kind of make a little shadow. We're just scrubbing it on and scrubbing it up slightly into the lighter part of our cloud. So now we want to make a darker purplish color that's kind of a mix of this color here and our sky color for the final shadow underneath this cloud here, just before we get to our mountains. So the same thing we did with our darker orangey cloud color. We're going to scrub some of it up and cover the areas that we haven't yet of our cloud here at the bottom. So that's our cloud. We're not gonna do anything more on that. That guy is done, because where our next focus is gonna be is our mountains. And we're actually gonna take a kind of similar color. It's like a cousin of this color that we just made. And I'm mixing up a like muted, slightly dark, but not too dark, purpley, bluish kind of color. And this is gonna be the first color of our mountains. This is gonna need to dry for just a sec before we do our next color. So we're gonna let that sit for a moment, take a sip of my Spindrift until they sponsor me. I'm still waiting, still a little damp, but while we're waiting for that to dry, why don't we mix up our color with a slightly smaller brush this time, slightly smaller flat brush, because we're gonna go in with a little bit of details. We're gonna keep this same color that we had here, and we're gonna go for a slightly lighter and bluer color. So we're gonna use this color to create some surfaces on the mountains that are getting more light. It's really subtle. The difference in color between our darkest mountain color and this color, the contrast is always going to be a little subtler the farther back we're seeing atmospherically. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's because the like particles in the atmosphere, like water droplets and stuff, they're like more concentrated the farther we're seeing past. There's like a name for this that I at one point knew in my life on what this actual like visual effect is called when it comes to painting landscapes, but I don't know no more.
The visual atmospheric effect that causes distant mountains to look lighter in color is called atmospheric perspective or aerial perspective. This effect is caused by the scattering of light in the atmosphere, which makes distant objects appear less distinct and less saturated in color.
There you go.
As a result, the mountains that are farther away appear lighter and bluer in color than those that are closer.
That's it, baby. That's it. Lighter and bluer in color.
Thank you, ChatGPT.
Thanks, ChatGPT. So those are the first section of our mountains. We're gonna do the next section which are gonna be darker because they're closer to us. So we're gonna mix up another color, and I'm gonna go back to my slightly bigger brush so I can fill these in. So let's get some darker blue, some more magenta, a little bit of this red too. Still gonna wanna add some of this white here. Yeah, I like that. Just a little bit darker, just a little. Now I'm going to draw my second set of mountains here. Okay, similar to what we did for those mountains. Once it's dry, we're gonna take our smaller brush and we're gonna add a little more detail with a color that's just slightly lighter than what we just used. Losing my patience. Oh, I'm sorry, Bubby, am I blowing? Is that silly? If I blow on Gomez, he thinks it's hilarious. I'm not gonna do it now because it makes him crazy, but it's all good. It's not silly time, we're working here. That's decently dry. If I were you, I would wait until it's fully dry, but I'm losing it. Just defining these mountains a little bit with a little bit of light that we're kind of throwing on this like right side. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna shift gears. We were working in lots of purples and blues and oranges, and now we're gonna go with a nice dark green that we're gonna mix up with a nice big brush. I want it pretty dark, so I'm gonna take big, and we want a lot of it. We're gonna cover this whole bottom panel here. We're gonna get lots of blue going here, lots of yellow. We're gonna mute it down with a little bit of our reds. We're going to now define where our mountains end and where our foreground little hill begins. And while we're waiting for that green to dry, I'm gonna put a little moon. It's always scary. Putting the moon is always scary because it's like, oh, it's gotta be perfect. While that's drying, what we're gonna do now is draw in the shapes of our little trees. And to do this, I'm going to use black, which I don't use very often at all when I'm painting. I'm gonna use this brush. I like it because it's got a nice thin edge to it. And I am going to just get some paint, a little bit of this black on my brush here. So it's nice and sharp like that. I'm going to tap a little line down to our grass and then tap back and forth a little bit in like a little zigzag shape. I learned this from Bob Ross. To get the approximate shape of a little pine tree. Just like that. So we're gonna do that all the way across. I'm choosing to keep my trees pretty sporadic. I don't want too many of them. So those are the silhouettes of our trees, and what we want to do now is take a tiny brush, highlights with like an actual green on just like the edges. The same side that we put the highlights on our mountains, that right side, that's also we're going to add some of the highlights for our tree. So I want to make it a super dark green, kind of like this green, but maybe a little bit yellowier. We're going to take our tiny little brush here. Mostly on this side, I'm going to add some of this green to the right side of the trees. Hi, handsome boy, you looking at me? You watching me paint, Mr. Man? Now that we got our trees done, and this is all dry, whoop, we're getting into the grassy, flowery kind of fields. We're gonna mix up a green. Actually, I might as well use some of this green from our trees to mix up darker green, but that still has some yellowy color to it. And we're gonna start tapping it back and forth across our field to give it a little bit of shape. So this dark green that we have down here already is as dark as it's gonna get. We're only getting lighter from here. So, grabbing my slightly bigger brush. Also, as we're working down, we're gonna wanna make the streaks, the darker green streaks between our highlights wider and wider as they get closer to us. So let's go even lighter, make a very similar color. Start to get a little more lightness with some white and maybe a little more yellow. And let's get some more grass. So this is our next highlight color. making sure that we're still keeping some of the dark colors back there, but that this highlight is now becoming the dominant. So, even just a little bit lighter now. And now we're being a little more careful about where we're putting this last highlight color. I am putting these little blades of grass over the shadow areas too, where we were trying to avoid that more so before. Now, because these little blades of grass are going to be the most foreground elements for the grass, these like lightest color, we can start bringing those over our shadows. And as we get further down, we're going to want to start to make our grass be a little bit longer. I'm going to angle some go that way, some go this way. They also don't all have to be perfect. The variety is kind of nice. So make some thick, some thin. Not every grass blade is the same. There's our grass, and now for, I would argue, the most important part, we're gonna do all the little flowers. So we've got purple flowers in here, and we've got little yellow whitish flowers in here. So we're gonna start with this middle section here. The flowers back here are just gonna be mostly just dots. No intention behind them other than making like little clusters of just dots that kind of follow the path of our hill. All right, so we're gonna want to mix up a yellow. We're gonna actually take some of this green that we used before for our highlight, and we're gonna add more yellow and more white. We're gonna take our little baby brush, and we are gonna start in this back corner here, start dotting in very, very small. So like we did with our highlights, these are gonna sit mostly on top of our most highlighted color. As we're getting closer, I want to start lightening up my yellow a little bit. So I added a little more white. Now that we're getting closer, our dots are going to get bigger and this color is lighter. I want the flowers to stand out more the closer that they get to us. Now we're close enough that I'm actually going to start to make some of these flowers look like flowers with little petals. So that flower I'm like viewing from the side, this flower's from the front. So those are little yellow / white flowers. Let's move on to our purple for right now. And once we have most of our purple filled in, that's when we can come back and kind of add more flowers if we have spaces that we want to fill in. But before I go too crazy with the white and yellow flowers, we want to make room. So let's mix up a purple similar to our sky and mountain purple. Grab my tiny little baby brush again and get some of that on there. So this purple, I'm thinking is more of like a lupin. That's what I drew on my original sketch. And a lupin is kind of like a flower that has a column of little flowers on it, like a little cone of flower buds. All right, so now we have placed all of our purple flowers. Now we're gonna add 1 or 2 sets of highlights. And like we did with all of our other little sets of highlights, it's gonna be basically the same color, just lightened up a little bit. So this is also, I feel like, gonna shift a little closer to blue. Make it have a little bit of a bluer tint with the highlights rather than purple. We wanna keep these guys back here mostly dark. But as we get a little bit closer, we can add a little bit of this light blue to some of these guys back here. Okay, now as we get closer, this is when we get a little more intentional. So we also want to keep in mind, the same with the mountains, same with the trees, that our light source slightly from this side. And we are going to have the brightest side of the leaves as we're tapping be on that side. Get to these guys, where the petals can start to be a little bit bigger. Now we're gonna go in with our last little thing, which is just lightening up this highlight color even more. All we're gonna add is some white and some blue. It's gonna be like a light blue kind of color. And this color we're gonna keep only on this bottom third down here. We're not gonna worry about this highlight on anything up here. So I'm keeping these highlights too, not just on the right side, but a little bit more in the center too. Like those are little light blooms that are facing right towards us. And I think I'm actually gonna really quick add one final highlight layer by adding just a little more white to my light blue here. Okay, and that is our finished little painting. That turned out beautiful. I love this one. I like painting things in places that maybe I'd want to go to and spend some time at. I love how vibrant and like neon these clouds turned out. I think the flowers are so pretty. Don't you want to just sit here? Who do I gotta murder to sit here? Nobody. I guess I could just go out and find that place, but it just looks so magical. I love this little guy. So this is our finished piece. Ta-da! If you have any questions about any little part of this painting, let me know in the comments below. Also, if you have any specific requests for things you might want to learn how to paint, anything at all, put those in the comments below too. The full unedited version of this video is going to be on my Patreon for all my sweet folks who support me there. So freaking sweet. They're the reason I get to do this, basically. So thank them. And also, you can become a Patreon member too. I am freaking obsessed with this painting. I love this one so much. I want to do a lot more in a similar vein to this. I haven't done a lot of like landscapey kind of things, and this just felt so good to paint this kind of thing. So more of this to come, and I'll see you in the next video. Little waist fat ass bitch, tap in. Tap, tap, tap in. That's been stuck in my head.